The lock jammed as I turned my key, a split second of resistance before it clicked open. Something was off. My front door felt different, lighter somehow, the weight redistributed. When it swung inward, the hallway lamp was on, a lamp I hadn't left on. Before I could process what was happening, a high-pitched squeal erupted from my living room, followed by small footprints pounding across my hardwood floors. "Auntie's home." The voice belonged to my brother's middle child, running toward me with sticky fingers and a face I hadn't invited into my space. I stepped inside and froze. My couch was covered with unfamiliar blankets. Toys were scattered across my coffee table. A baby swing sat in the corner where my reading chair should have been. And there, emerging from my kitchen with a mug in her hand, my mug, was Olivia, my brother's wife, wearing an expression of practiced innocence. "There you are," she chirped. "We were wondering when you'd be back." Behind her stood my mother, Susan, arranging flowers in a vase I'd never seen before. My father, Mark, sat at my dining table, newspaper spread out like he'd been there for years. And leaning against the doorframe to my bedroom was Ethan, my younger brother, twirling a set of keys, my spare keys, around his finger. "Surprise," he said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "We moved in. My name is Paige, I'm 31 and a software quality specialist. This is the story of how I reclaimed the home they tried to steal from beneath me." I couldn't breathe. The family that had discarded me years ago had somehow materialized in my sanctuary, the home I'd crawled my way into after living in a truck camper for 11 months. They'd broken in, rearranged my furniture, and were acting like it was perfectly normal to invade someone's house without permission. "What are you doing here?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. "And how did you get in?" Susan stepped forward, wiping her hands on a dish towel, my dish towel. "Honey, we've been trying to reach you. Didn't you get our messages?" I hadn't, because they hadn't sent any. The last time I'd called them was during the pandemic when I'd lost my apartment and needed a place to park my camper. They demanded rent higher than most commercial lots. "You need to leave," I said. "Now." Ethan laughed, the same dismissive sound I'd heard my entire childhood whenever I'd asked for basic respect. "Come on, Paige. Don't be dramatic. We've got a lease." "A lease?" The word hung in the air between us. Olivia stepped forward, bouncing the baby I hadn't noticed strapped to her chest. "Your landlord was so understanding about our situation. With the 3 kids and another on the way." She patted her belly meaningfully. "He agreed to transfer the lease to us. Said he'd talk to you about finding a smaller place." I didn't have a landlord. I owned this house, bought it outright with the money I'd saved living in my truck while working double shifts at a warehouse. Every nail in every wall was mine. "Show me this lease," I said, my heart pounding against my ribs. Susan exchanged a look with Ethan before he disappeared into my bedroom, returning with a folder. He handed me a document with official-looking letterhead. The signature at the bottom made my stomach turn. It was mine, or something close enough, a forgery they thought would hold up. I pulled out my phone and took pictures while they watched, bewildered by my calmness. They'd expected tears, pleading, the same little girl who'd been trained to give way whenever Ethan wanted something. But that version of me had died in a truck camper behind a warehouse during a winter storm, when no one had answered my calls. "You have 30 minutes, I said, stepping back toward the door. "Pack what you brought. Anything left behind goes to the curb." Olivia's face crumpled. "But where will we go? Your parents sold their house last month. We have nowhere." "That sounds like a problem you created," I interrupted. "And one you'll solve somewhere else." Susan stepped forward, her voice dropping into the guilt-inducing whisper that had controlled me for years. "After everything we've done for you?" I laughed then, a sound so foreign it startled even me. "What exactly have you done for me, Susan?" "When I needed a place to sleep during a global pandemic, you quoted me rental prices. When I was 17, you told me not to come back without direction. I was still in high school." I pointed to the folder in Ethan's hands. "And now you've committed fraud to steal my house." Ethan's face darkened. "It's just temporary. You've got all this space and we've got 3 kids. For soon. It's not fair that." "Fair?" The word tasted bitter. "Was it fair when you broke my arm pushing me down the stairs and Mom made me tell Grandma I fell? Was it fair when I got straight A's and you got rewarded for CS?" I stepped closer to him. "Was it fair that I slept in a truck for nearly a year while you lived rent-free with our parents?" Mark finally spoke, his voice quiet as always. You chose to leave, Paige. I chose survival, I corrected him. And I'm choosing it again now. I held up my phone. 25 minutes left, or I call the police and file charges for breaking and entering, forgery, and attempted fraud. The transformation was immediate. Susan began gathering things, her movements sharp and angry. Mark folded his newspaper with deliberate slowness. Ethan glared at me but started collecting toys. Only Olivia remained still, tears streaking her perfect makeup. You would do this to family? She asked. With children involved. I looked at the children, my nieces and nephew, who barely knew me because their parents had decided I didn't deserve to be part of their lives until they needed something from me. I'm not doing anything to them, I said quietly. Their parents made promises they couldn't keep using methods that could land them in jail. That's not my responsibility to fix. I stepped onto the porch and called my friend Jessica, a lawyer who'd helped me with the house purchase. I explained the situation while my family scrambled inside, piling belongings into suitcases they'd clearly planned to unpack permanently. 28 minutes later, they filed out past me. Susan wouldn't look at me. Mark paused briefly, his expression unreadable. Ethan herded the confused children toward their minivan, shooting venomous glances back at the house, my house. Olivia was the last to leave, still crying. Where will we go? She asked again. Wherever you were before you decided to take what's mine, I answered. After they drove away, I changed the locks immediately. Jessica arrived an hour later with a cease and desist letter and a bottle of wine. We sat at my kitchen table while I shook with delayed rage. They actually forged your signature? She asked, examining the fake lease. They've always believed they were entitled to whatever I had, I explained. When we were kids, it was my toys. Now it's my house. The next morning, I drove to the police station and filed a report. I didn't request charges, not yet, but created an official record of what they'd done. The officer looked uncomfortable as I explained the situation. Family disputes can be complicated, he said. This isn't a dispute, I corrected him. This is attempted theft. Over the following weeks, I installed security cameras, changed my phone number, and blocked them on every platform. I thought that would be the end of it, but Ethan started spreading stories among our extended family, claiming I'd thrown his children out into the cold, that I was heartless and cruel. So I did something they wouldn't expect. I invited those same extended family members to my home for Christmas Eve, aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years. People who had only heard one version of our family story. People who had only seen the carefully curated social media posts that never included me. I sent formal invitations. I prepared food for days. And when 10 people arrived with folding chairs and homemade dishes, I welcomed them into the home I'd fought to keep. My Aunt Cheryl hugged me tightly at the door. It's been too long, she said. We've missed you. My Uncle Kurt helped set up extra seating in the living room. My grandmother arrived with her famous cinnamon pie and stories I'd never heard about my father's childhood. No one asked about my parents or Ethan. They'd all seen the social media posts where I'd been systematically erased from family events for years. They'd all received the wedding invitation to my brother's wedding that hadn't included my name. As we sat down to dinner, I shared my story. The years of being second best, the pandemic that left me homeless, the 11 months living in a truck camper, saving every penny while showering at gas stations. I showed them pictures of the camper, still parked in my side yard as a reminder of how far I'd come. I showed them the fraudulent lease my brother had created to steal my home. My grandmother reached for my hand across the table. They shouldn't have done that to you, she said, her voice soft but certain. Around 8 p.m., as we were clearing dinner plates, the front door opened without a knock. Susan entered first, holding a tray of store-bought cookies like a peace offering. Mark followed silently. Ethan came next with his hands raised in mock surrender, and Olivia trailed behind, her eyes already darting around the room, cataloguing who was there. Merry Christmas, Susan announced, as if she'd been invited. The room went silent. My cousin Emily stood slowly, arms crossed. Uncle Kurt looked at me, waiting for direction. I said nothing. After years of being silenced, I let the uncomfortable moment stretch. Kurt finally turned to Susan. You weren't invited, he said simply. Susan forced a smile. We came to make amends. No, Kurt replied, you came to be seen. That's different. Olivia began crying, her voice rising as she tried to explain about the children, about needing space, about how unfair it was that someone with no family had such a beautiful home while they struggled. "You don't even have a family, Paige," she sobbed, "and we do." My Aunt Cheryl turned to Susan with a sharp look. "You had a family," she said. "You had 2 children, but you made one disappear." She gestured around the room. "You erased her. When she needed you, you laughed. And now that she doesn't, you come bearing cookies." Ethan tried to speak, but Kurt cut him off. "You tried to steal her house," he said. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft." The final voice came from my grandmother, small but clear. "I saw the lease," she said softly. "I saw the broken lock when I arrived, and I saw the photos from all the years you left her out." She looked at me then. "You don't owe them forgiveness." I nodded once. That was enough. No screaming, no storming out, just silence so thick it seemed to swallow the room. Susan stepped back first, leaving the cookies on the counter. Olivia wiped her face and followed. Ethan didn't look up once. Mark lingered at the door. "Merry Christmas," he said, but it sounded hollow. After they left, the music resumed, hesitant at first, like the room was remembering how to be warm again. No one mentioned what had happened. We passed plates and refilled wine glasses as if we hadn't just witnessed a family fragment beyond repair. Later that night, I stepped onto the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The yard was quiet, frost beginning to form on my truck. The camper sat just beyond the fence line, pale in the winter light. My cousin had asked to sleep in it, curious about how I'd lived for those 11 months. "It reminds me of being a kid again," he'd said, meaning it kindly. I walked the perimeter of my property, running my hand along the aluminum siding of the camper, the same camper where I'd once cried myself to sleep, teeth clenched, promising I would never beg again. I passed the spot where Ethan had parked the moving van just weeks earlier, grass still dead in the shape of its tires. Before going back inside, I paused at the porch. The front light was still on, I hadn't turned it off. They said I didn't have a family, yet 10 people had stayed in my home that night. They'd shared food, washed dishes, told stories. No one had cried manipulatively. No one had thrown anything. No one had asked me to leave. I reached up and flipped the porch light off. There was no need to leave it on anymore. No one I needed to wait for would be coming.